Now we move on to the main event of this podcast. Anthony Joshua, Oleksandr Usyk for the unified WBA, WBO, IBF heavyweight titles. I gotta be honest, Robert. I actually still am not in somewhat of a disbelief that this fight is actually gonna happen. We knew that at some point Oleksandr Usyk was going to get his title shot because he's the mandatory challenger for that WBO belt. But boy, now just days away, it kind of feels surreal that Oleksandr Usyk, former undisputed cruiserweight champion, has a chance to walk away with the lion's share of the heavyweight titles. It's almost Evander Holyfield-esque in that regard. I mean, obviously, if Usyk wins, he's not the undisputed heavyweight champion, but he's a belt away from becoming undisputed heavyweight champion. I gotta be honest.
I'm glad you brought up Holyfield, because when you finish your point, I've got a Evander Holyfield type of analogy to make when it comes to Usyk.
Yeah, I mean, this fight it can go a number of different ways. Now, I think to me the biggest factor that will decide this fight is how much is Usyk going to take what he learned from the win against Derek Chisora and not allow Anthony Joshua to get a chance to bully him around physically. Not necessarily dominate him or anything, but we've seen this time again that fighters, no matter how good they are, there's a ceiling to how much they can win against upper echelon fighters at higher weight classes. Now, even though it's from cruiserweight to heavyweight, the next division, we're talking about several dozens of pounds of disadvantage that Usyk is probably going to be facing.
And inches in height.
Yeah. Now, the argument for Usyk is that Usyk is so good and so fundamentally sound and arguably the most technically gifted boxer today that it'll ultimately not matter, because what Usyk does so well, aside from his mastery of spacing and punching at different angles, is his ability to take away a fighter's best weapon. We've seen that time again. He going back to the fight against Murat Gassiev in the World Boxing Super Series finals. The question, the matchup was maybe about as perfect of a boxer versus puncher type of fight, and that Usyk just completely cut off Gassiev's power, just made it a non-factor for 12 rounds. The difference here is that, as you mentioned, the height and the reach disadvantage that Usyk is going to be facing, that's going to be something that will definitely play a factor. I don't know how much of a factor it's going to play. It all, to me, comes down to how much is Usyk going to take what he learned from that Chisora fight, because he's not going to bulk up 20, 30 pounds from that fight. It's kind of been made abundantly clear. He's comfortable at the size, at the weight that he's at, but we have to also understand that, Joshua is a dynamic puncher. And we saw that in the Andy Ruiz rematch. He's not afraid of just cruising to the final bell with his length and his jab alone. And if Usyk can't find a way to sort of take away that reach advantage that Joshua has, it's going to be a hard night for Oleksandr Usyk, because sometimes Anthony Joshua sees a way to win a fight, and to the detriment of the entertainment value, he's going to try his best to try to execute that game plan. And I'm still not entirely convinced that we'll see the same Joshua as we've seen in, prior to the loss to Andy Ruiz. Because let's be honest, Robert, the win against Alexander Povetkin, I mean, anyone could have came in with that aggressive style that Anthony Joshua had in just beating Alexander Povetkin. Not actually, no. What am I talking about? It wasn't Alexander Povetkin. It was.
Well, Joshua did knock out Povetkin a few years ago.
Yeah, he did, but that was before. Yeah. I'm talking about Kubrat Pulev.
Okay, yeah, Pulev.
Yeah. I mean, that Joshua that knocked out Alexander Povetkin was calculating, but also willing to take a risk.
Yes.
In the rematch against Andy Ruiz, Joshua didn't want to take any risk. And the fight against Kubrat Pulev, there was no risk. So he could have done whatever the hell he wanted, and he would have won no matter what.
Exactly.
So this will really be the first actual test to me for Anthony Joshua since that first Andy Ruiz fight, because Andy no-showed for the rematch. Pulev just is not a great boxer. So this is interesting. This is a good fight. And I mean, if we were to compare both of these guys and just base our prediction on who's the better boxer, it would have to be Usyk in that regard, because I think Usyk is a better boxer than Anthony Joshua. But Joshua's got power, Joshua's got length, Joshua's got the height, and it's not like Joshua has no boxing acumen whatsoever. He does. It's just that Usyk is so far above almost everyone else in the heavyweight division. The only thing that's setting him back is the fact that Usyk is what's considered in today's heavyweight division, he is a small heavyweight. What are your thoughts, Robert?
I will predict this fight as an analogy to two fighters that these two fighters remind me of. I've always felt that Anthony Joshua is a poor man's Lennox Lewis, and Alexander Usyk is a poor man's Evander Holyfield. I see this fight going the same way both those fights went. Lennox Lewis got robbed in his first fight against Evander Holyfield, one of the worst robberies in the history of boxing, and then won the second fight. And how he won both fights was he stayed outside and he jabbed his way to victory, didn't take a lot of chances. Even when he hurt Holyfield in the first fight, Holyfield survived, and Lennox Lewis went back to working behind the jab. Joshua and Usyk both throw a lot of jabs. The majority of their punches thrown are jabs, if you look at the statistics. Mm-hmm. Joshua is going to stay outside and use that jab. Usyk's only way of winning was the same way with Holyfield against Lennox Lewis. He's got to find a way to get inside and try to hurt Joshua, and I don't see that happening because of the huge size differential. So I would go Joshua by comfortable unanimous decision.
Now the thing about it, you put up a lot of good points. The one thing that I'm also looking at is, I mean, what if Usyk can able to close the distance before Joshua? Because I mean, when it comes to fighting at mid-range, Usyk is an absolute master at his craft.
Yes,
I mean, go back to the fight against Tony Bellew. When he knocked him out, it was all done with precise punching at mid-range, not necessarily up close and both these guys just breathing down each other's necks. But it wasn't exactly
Bellew was never the boxer Anthony Joshua is.
No, he's not.
It's totally different. It's one thing to knock out a Tony Bellew, who, while was a very good fighter, former world champion, not on the same level as Joshua, doesn't have the same boxing acumen. Joshua is safety first since that Andy Ruiz fight. He knows that he fought the same way against Joseph Parker, where he stayed outside and he used his jab. It was only against Ruiz that you saw him take chances that he normally doesn't take. I don't think he took Ruiz as a serious challenge, and it cost him the same way that cost Lennox Lewis against Hasim Rahman and Oliver McCall. So he's definitely taking Usyk very seriously. He knows this is going to be a tough fight, and he knows that a lot of money in his future is riding on him beating Usyk, because you have that undisputed championship fight versus either Fury or Wilder if he beats Usyk on the table. So I don't see him trying to slug with Usyk. I see him taking the Lennox Lewis versus Evander Holyfield and David Tua route, taking the Joshua versus Parker and Ruiz 2 route, where he's going to use his superior physical advantages, and they're very, very huge advantages, and use that jab. Both been through a lot of jabs. I don't see Usyk out jabbing Joshua. Definitely see Joshua out jabbing Usyk. And for Usyk to win, he's got to force a firefight, and he might get caught. He's fighting a much bigger guy.
Yeah, and and it's going to be interesting if he can force Joshua to engage in a firefight. As I mentioned, that's going to be the first time he's doing that since the fight against Andy Ruiz.
Exactly.
So how much is that going to play a factor? I could very well see Anthony Joshua just trying to go for that same jab, keep yourself away from Usyk at all times in the same manner he did against Andy Ruiz. He could very well try to go for that strategy. I
think that's his only strategy. I don't.
The one thing is that here's the thing. Unlike Andy, Usyk is very capable of finding a way to counter that, because when you're dealing with something like that, that's not necessarily the bigger guy. Joshua is just a bigger guy, so I can't do anything about it. It's more spacing. It's more on distance and footwork, and those are things and qualities that Usyk can very well use to his advantage. So if Joshua tried to go for that same Andy Ruiz rematch strategy, I don't think it's going to work as well as it did back then, because Usyk is just such a much better boxer. I'm going to go and reluctantly pick Anthony Joshua to win this fight. I think it's going to be close. I think it'll be very, very close. I'm going to say it's like a 8-4, maybe even 7-5, but an unconvincing 7-5, in the sense that it's not like Usyk was robbed or anything like that. But I think it'll be a close fight. But ultimately, I just still haven't seen Usyk really shine against a top tier heavyweight who's that much bigger than him. I agree with you in this one sense. The only way Usyk wins this fight is by knockout. He's got to knock out Joshua. And it's possible. It's very much possible.
It's very possible. Usyk has the power, and Joshua, throughout his entire career, has shown a very shaky chin. Remember, he almost got knocked out by Dillian White before he won the heavyweight championship of the world. Right, and right you are. So I think we're both in agreement. I think Joshua wins, but I ultimately am very, very excited for this fight. Let me tell you something. He's going to win, I believe, but the entire fight's going to be intense, because every time Usyk lands or gets close, we're going to be like, uh-oh. Couldn't agree with you more.